So this is good because I'm just going over what we're talking about. So first, I'll be going over the different hosting platforms. I won't be authenticating with each one, but I will be talking about the automatic domain authentication versus the ones that are not automatic and how to go through each of those processes. Then we'll be jumping into the error messages. So once you've started the domain authentication and you've entered in all of the records and you're seeing some error messages, there are some common ones. So the too many SPF records you might be seeing, or some saying that records are not found. These are all very common, and I'll explain what they mean and also how to bypass that so you can get your domain authenticated. Then lastly, I'll just be going over some frequently asked questions, such as if you're moving from MailerLite Classic to the new MailerLite, what do you need to do to authenticate your domain there? And just a few basic frequently asked questions. Okay, so getting started with authentication. The first step is obviously to purchase a domain. So when you're authenticating your domain, it means that you have your own domain that you have purchased from a hosting provider outside of MailerLite. So MailerLite does not provide domains or hosting for domains. So that's why you need to get the domain from GoDaddy, Cloudflare, Bluehost, any of the many hosting platforms out there. You don't need a website for your domain. So you don't actually have to have a website attached to the domain at all. You just need to have the email address. That's the most important part that uses that paid domain. So for example, if your domain is like this, example.com, you don't have to have any website. It just has to have an email address that would be like newsletter@example.com or hello or whatever it is. So the difference is if you're using a paid domain versus a free domain, you can see here at the bottom, a free domain would look something like this. It would have Gmail or Yahoo or just kind of the basic free providers. Whereas the paid domain, which is what we're talking about with authentication, is looking something like this, where it has your domain at the end of the email address. So if you don't already have a domain, I assume that people joining this will already have their domain purchased. But if you are looking into this, we do have guides on how to get a custom domain and where to find where to start that process. Okay, so one of the first things I want to go over is new MailerLite versus classic MailerLite, because when it comes to authentication, the process is slightly different. And some people joining might be on the new MailerLite and some might be on classic. And if you're not sure, I will just briefly explain the difference. So MailerLite Classic was discontinued about 2 years ago, but this was the previous version of MailerLite, and a lot of our clients are still using this platform. So if this is what your dashboard looks like, you are using MailerLite Classic. And the authentication process will be a little different. So keep in mind, as I'm talking about authentication, I'll be talking about how to do it for the new MailerLite and how to do it for Classic. So that's what I'll be talking about when I say the two differences. So this is what the Classic platform looks like. And then this is the new MailerLite. So if you signed up to MailerLite after 2022, most likely, or you will be in the new MailerLite. So this is what you will be seeing. This is the dashboard. You can authenticate in both platforms, of course. It's just slightly different. So I'll be talking about what that looks like. But this is the new MailerLite versus classic MailerLite. So you can see which one you have based on how they look. Just briefly, I want to talk about authentication versus getting your domain for sites and landing pages. And this is what I am talking about here. So when you are in your MailerLite account and you are looking at the domain section and you are about to authenticate, you're going through the process of starting the authentication, you will see two sections. You'll see sending domains and you'll see sites. Both allow you to enter in your domain and you'll receive records. So the process looks similar. However, these are two very different things. The sending domains is what we'll be focusing on. So this is the email address, the domain that you are sending newsletters from, and that is what you want to authenticate. So when we talk about verification, authentication, it is this we're talking about, the sending domains. Now the sites section is different. This is not what we're going to be talking about today, although we do have guides on this. This is for if you create a website or a landing page in MailerLite and you have a premium account, you can use your own domain and attach it to those sites for those sites to use your own domain. But again, that is different to the sending domains. So if you're curious about how to attach your domain to a site, we do have guides on that. But keep in mind for this, it is about the sending domains. That is what authentication, what we're going to be authenticating. So let's talk about authenticating with various domain hosts. So as I mentioned, MailerLite does not provide hosting for our clients. So you have to have hosting elsewhere. So these are all of the different hosting providers that we support and just some of the ones that you can use. So as you can see, pretty much most of the platforms that you'll be using for hosting will come up here. So pretty much everyone will be using one of these. As I mentioned, we do have automatic domain authentication for 3 providers, which is Cloudflare, GoDaddy, and IONOS. So for those, I'll be showing what that means. And for the rest, it is a manual authentication. But these are all of the different hosting platforms that you can choose from that you might be using your domain with. Okay, so let's get into the demo where I go through regular and automatic domain authentication and what exactly that looks like. So I'm going to switch over to the MailerLite platform. All right, so this is the start of the authentication. So I'm in the new MailerLite, okay? So if you are in classic MailerLite, it will look slightly different, but the functions are basically the same. It's just a slightly different UI to the platform. So I'm working with the new MailerLite right now. Okay, so from the MailerLite dashboard, this is what you'll see when you first log into the new MailerLite. You first will go over to account settings, and then domains. And that is where you will enter into the area where I showed before, where you'll see the sending domains, as well as the ability to add custom domains to sites as well. But as I mentioned, we are only focusing on sending domains right now. Okay, so let's start with adding the domain email. So when you first are starting the authentication process, you want to add the domain first. And this is where you will add the email address that is attached to your domain. So the email address will have an inbox, and that is the email address you will put here. So for example, if I enter in an address like this, okay, so this would be the email address that is attached to the domain that we have, okay? So there are 2 parts to this. There's verification and authentication. Verification is we send a verification email to that address to verify that it has an inbox that's reachable and that you can click the link to confirm that inbox is reachable. And that is the verification. That is only one step. The second step is authentication. So that's what we'll be focusing on today. For the verification, all you need to do is go into the inbox for that email address. You'll see the verification email and you click the link, then that will be verified. And that's all you need to do for verification, but you still need to authenticate. So that is the second step. So let's go ahead and do that. So this domain is an IONOS domain, and you can see that I didn't have to do anything. It already automatically saw that it was an IONOS domain, and it's given me the instructions to start that. That is because of the automatic domain authentication, as I mentioned. So IONOS domains, Cloudflare domains, and GoDaddy domains will do this. So you don't have to do anything differently. All you have to do is add in the email address, and it'll automatically pick up that it is one of those providers, and then you'll see the instructions for that specific provider. If you are not using one of those domains, it will look like this. So let's add another one. And I'm going to be adding a domain that is not one of those 3 domains, so not a automatic authentication. Okay, so this one will look slightly different. So you see here, it doesn't have any specific provider that it's showing me. It's just saying to select the provider. So this one happens to be a Bluehost, which is one of the other options. And I will show here as well that if you choose, say, Squarespace, it does give you the option to log right in or to look at the setup instructions for each of the providers. Since this is Bluehost, I will pick other. But let me go back over. So you can see the slight difference between how the automatic picks up the provider and how the, if it's manual, then it does not pick up the provider. So let's go ahead and start with this. So this is the automatic with IONOS. So it'll prompt me to log in first. Okay, there we go. And then we choose our domain. As you can see, once you go into the hosting provider, it'll have you log in. And from there, it basically does the automatic authentication for you for those 3 hosting providers. So there's no need to enter in the records manually. It'll just take you straight into the hosting provider, and then you can go ahead and authenticate that way. So I will show that right now. So you can see that is the automatic one. It just logs you straight in, and then you can go from there. You also have the option to do it manually, which is the same for all the other hosting providers. So that is what I will go through when you can see the records. Okay, so for this one, this is my Bluehost domain. And I want to see the instructions. Okay. And you can see here that after I select the hosting provider, which in this case is other because it's Bluehost, not one of the ones that it has here, then I can see the different records. So this is the difference between the automatic and the manual. So the automatic authentication will just add these records for you. You don't have to copy and paste them over. That is for the 3 providers I mentioned. But for all the other providers, you will need to manually add in the records. Okay, so this is what it looks like. When you enter in the email address and you authenticate, you select your provider, and then you will see the CNAME record and the text record. And that is what you will put into the hosting provider. Okay, so I will just quickly show what that would look like. Okay, so what we're going to do is take the records that you're seeing there, the CNAME and the text record, and put those into the hosting provider. So depending on which hosting provider you have, you can go ahead and enter those in, and I will show how I will do it on my end. We have also guides on each of the providers, so you're able to see how to exactly put these records in different providers. So for Bluehost, for Hostinger, for Namecheap, it's a slightly different process for each one. So that's why I'm saying we have guides for each of the providers. But this is what it looks like when you have the records in MailerLite and then you bring them over to the hosting provider itself. In this case, you will see that because I have not added records, if I check them and then check records again, there will be errors. So this is what we'll go into next. Okay. So with the automatic domain authentication, you can also still sometimes see errors, and I'll explain that as well. But for the manual authentication, you might be seeing something like this. So you can have errors in both places. So it could be the DKIM record is not found, or it could be the SPF record was not found either. And if you have already added them, it just could mean a couple different things. So I'll explain exactly how to get past these errors. But this is what it looks like if you have the records created, take them over to the hosting provider, whichever it is, and the same with the text record. Click check records, and then that's if you see this. This is what we'll go into next. Okay, so let's talk about some of those error messages. So the first one I showed was the DKIM not being found. DKIM records were not found. Make sure you have added them. Again, that is what it will look like. This will be if you have already added the record and then you click that check records. This is maybe something that you might see. So what does this mean? If that record is failing, it is actually a slightly different process. So with the new MailerLite, you can update the CNAME record to this record name without your domain at the end of the record name. So this is what I mean. When you look at the CNAME record that you're given, you'll see that it does have the domain at the end automatically. You can see here. So some providers, each provider is different. Not every provider will accept the records exactly as we have given them. So that's why there's some variations on how to enter those records. So if you see the error that the record is failing or it's not found, it could be that you just need to remove the domain at the end of the record name. So that means just having that first part of the record and try it that way. Sometimes the provider already adds the record, the domain name for you, so you don't have to add it twice. So if you're in the new MailerLite, it could just be as simple as updating that record. In MailerLite Classic, it is slightly different because it is a text record. So that's the only difference here. In the new MailerLite, the DKIM is a CNAME record. It's just the type. And in the Classic MailerLite, that is a text record. Okay. In all of our guides, you'll be able to see the difference as well. And then that is the same process. It's just removing the domain at the end of the record name, although the record name just looks a little different in MailerLite Classic. But essentially, it's the same troubleshooting technique. If that record fails, Try it without the domain at the end of the name, because most likely it means that your provider has already added it for you. So that is one way to fix that error. Most likely that is why it's failing. And then the next is the SPF record. So this one is a little trickier because there are a few different reasons why it can fail. Again, this is what it looks like. We see that right here. If the text record fails, this is the SPF. It looks exactly like this. So this is not the only error that you can see with the text, with the SPF record, and I'll explain that. But this is one of the more common ones. It's the same as the other one. It's just not found, and make sure you have added them. All this means is that the MailerLite is looking for the record in the hosting platform, and for some reason it's not recognizing it. So that is why it is saying this. So there are a couple of reasons why that can happen for the SPF record. So there are a few different reasons why this one specifically can fail. The first one is that the records don't match. And this is why you would most likely see this error, were not found. It might mean that it didn't match. So that could mean that the record was not entered in exactly as it's shown here. Make sure you're copying exactly as it allows you to here, and then pasting it right into your hosting provider. Otherwise, it could mean that the records don't match. There could be an extra space. There could be something slightly off. For some reason, it doesn't match. So you want to make sure that you're copying and pasting exactly as it's shown in MailerLite. So ensure the SPF record in your domain's DNS settings matches exactly with the one in the domain page. Remember that they're case sensitive, so it has to be exactly as it's shown there. Now, another case is when the SPF record name or host field should be blank. And this is another case of different providers working in different ways. So some hosting providers want you to have a name in the host field. So what do I mean by that? I mean this part here. So for the record, we give you the name. So typically that means you want to copy and paste it into the hosting provider where it gives you the option to add the name, or sometimes it's called the host. However, that is not universal for every provider. Some providers don't want anything in that area. So if you do see the name/host field, it can be both, or it can say name or host, and you have put that name, that domain name, and it's saying that the record isn't accepted, not approved, all of that. There are a couple of different ways to do it. So instead, you can use the @ symbol, just like this, the @ symbol in the name or the host field, or leave it blank. And if you can try different techniques depending on which one gets approved, but so this is, yes. So essentially, if you see that this is one of the options and you see that it's, sometimes it'll actually say as well. So one of the other things that it could say here is that host name needs to be left blank. So sometimes it will actually say, if that is a specific issue, it will say needs to be left blank. And that can mean that it needs this little symbol or just as is. So you can try both to get that approved that way. Okay, and the last way that this record cannot be approved is if multiple SPF records are found. So this is actually an error that you would see as well. So just like you see this here, records not found, make sure you have added them. Another option is this could say too many SPF records or multiple SPF records found. And what does that mean? Basically, when it comes to the DNS settings in the hosting provider, you can only have one SPF record out of all of them. So if you already have one from, let's say, another emailing service, then once you add ours, obviously that creates more than one, two, and then it'll say that error that you have more than one. So how to get past this? There are a few ways. Because you can only have one SPF record, you don't necessarily want to get rid of the others because you might need them for specific reasons. Like I said, it could be other mailing services. It could be several different things. So if you don't need those other SPF records, you can delete them. But assuming that you do still need all of the SPF records in your hosting provider, this is when the automatic merging comes in. So when you click check DNS records in MailerLite, the site will automatically check and update the SPF records value with the merged version. So what does that mean? When you are looking at this is the initial value that it's given, right? But let's say I have multiple SPF records in my DNS. So when I click check records, MailerLite is going to check that for me. It's going to see if I have multiple SPF records. And if I do, it's going to merge them for me. It's going to combine them. So what that means is if the value looked at first like this, check the new SPF value. A successful merge typically includes more than one. So it'll be a bit longer like this. So all that means is that at first, you might be seeing this value. You check records, you see the error that says there are too many SPF records. Check records again, this value will update. So this will actually update to include all of those SPF records, if that makes sense. So essentially, if you see that error, click check records again. This will update. And then you want to add that new value because that will be the merged value, the merged SPF. So it will take multiple SPF records, combine them into one, and then you can add that into your hosting provider. So what does that look like? When you have that new SPF record, so you've seen the error, you've clicked that button, and you see you have a new SPF record to add. This is what you would do. You would first remove all existing SPF records in your DNS provider, in your hosting provider, in Bluehost, in GoDaddy, whatever it is. Delete all the SPF records in the DNS zone, including the MailerLite record. Then add in the merged record. So this means the one that was given to you by MailerLite, the one that includes all of them, you want to add that back in, okay? Create a new text record with the new value. Again, that's this one here, okay? Then recheck with MailerLite. So once you have removed the SPF records, added back in that merged record, you want to go back into MailerLite, back to the domains page, and click check DNS records, okay? Which is this button here, check records. Okay. And then it will check them again. So those are a couple different ways. If you're seeing these errors that are very common, these are a few of the reasons how to bypass, how to check different things. That's another thing as well, is you might need to try a few different methods. If you see that things are not authenticating, it could be for a few different reasons. So you might need to try a couple of these techniques. If you are still seeing errors, so if you have tried all of these troubleshooting techniques, you have updated the DKIM record, you've removed your domain, you've merged SPF records, if you've done it all and it's still not working, you're still seeing all the errors, that just might mean you need to give it a little bit of time, because as it says here, it can take up to 24 hours for your records to become active. So that means that when you update those DNS records, they're not updated right away everywhere. They can take some time. So it can take up to 24 hours for MailerLite to recognize that they have been updated and changed. So if you have updated everything and everything looks correct, you've copied and pasted, nothing looks off, and it's still giving you errors, it might just mean you have to wait a little bit. Okay, so check back after 24 hours. You can check that the check records and see if it authenticated after that time. Because most likely, if everything is correct, you've troubleshooted all of the errors, you've gone through and checked that everything is as it should be, then most likely it just needs a bit more time. Okay. So I'm going to just go over some last questions. These are just a couple things that come up with authentication when it comes to troubleshooting. So I did mention the difference between MailerLite Classic and the new MailerLite and how the authentication varies slightly, just slightly. If you are thinking about migrating over, so if you are in MailerLite Classic and you want to move over to the new MailerLite, which I do recommend, then you will need to update the authentication as well. You will need to reset your authentication, which means removing the previous records from Classic and replacing them with records in the new MailerLite. So because the records are slightly different in each one, you will have to remove the ones from Classic. So go into the hosting provider, find the Classic records that you added before, delete them, and then go through the process that I just showed, where you go into the new MailerLite, you add your domain, you authenticate it as I've shown, and go through that process in the new system. So you will need to re-authenticate if you are migrating. That is only if you are migrating from Classic, that is what you'll need to do. Okay, and I also want to briefly touch on domain alignment. I'm not going to go into this, but domain alignment does come up. It's right here. So when we talk about authentication, verification, you can also mention domain alignment. When it comes to the things that are necessary or the most important, it is definitely verification and authentication. These are the two things that you will need checked in order to send newsletters using that domain. Domain alignment is not necessary, or it's not required for any reason. It is just an extra authentication or an extra deliverability step. So domain alignment is extra authentication designed for larger senders with healthy sending reputations. So if you are, as mentioned, a large sender, you have a good reputation, you are sending emails regularly, newsletters out regularly to large lists, I do recommend looking into domain alignment. It is a little more, it involves adding more records to your DNS settings. So just more of the copying and pasting, troubleshooting, all of that. But again, not necessary. It's just recommended for certain senders. And we do have documentation on that if you are interested. But again, it is different from authentication and it's not required. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. I will go ahead and end this webinar now. I appreciate everyone joining today, asking your questions. Keep an eye out in the community and online on our website for future events. I will be doing more authentication, troubleshooting, things like that. So keep an eye out for that. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining. See you next time.